The decline of JCPenney. This is a topic that many people have been asking me to talk about because they're one of the biggest stores to ever exist. They were big 100 years ago. I'm sure you've been to a JCPenney. Your parents have been to JCPenney. Your grandparents and maybe your great-grandparents have been there. Historically, it's been one of these companies that you figure will always be there, but well, I'm guessing most people realize that JCPenney isn't what it used to be, but you may not understand how severe this is. I'll get into the numbers a little deeper in a minute, but just looking at 2018, their comparable store sales were down 3.1%, which means on average, each store is generating 3.1% fewer sales than the year before. This is really bad considering they have fewer stores than last year, and in fact have fewer stores than they've had in many years. It's currently at 864, and that number is traditionally over 1,000, so it would make sense that in 2018 they reported lower sales than in any recent year. Also in 2018, they lost $255 million and have been reporting losses for the past 8 years. They are undeniably and consistently losing money. They brought in over $11 billion and they lost money from it. Part of the reason is because they paid $313 million in interest expense, which means they have billions of dollars of debt weighing them down. As far as the stock market, their current trading price is around $1.50, which is down. In 2006, it was around $80. I found this article from The Motley Fool titled 3 Stocks to Avoid Like the Plague. JCPenney is one of them. I got this from their 2018 annual report. It shows that if you had invested $100 in JCPenney in 2013, today you'd have $22 remaining. And 2013 wasn't exactly their highest year. Oh, and hold off on all those comments saying that the internet killed JCPenney and all the retail stores are doomed. Yes, that's part of it, but it's not that simple. If you look here, JCPenney has performed much worse than similar department stores. That $100 would only be down to $94 if you had invested in the other S&P department stores, which are Macy's, Kohl's, and Nordstrom. So I think we can agree, that's all part of it, but there's more here. JCPenney goes all the way back to 1902. James Cash Penny was a salesman at a retail store in Wyoming called the Golden Rule. After 3 years at the position, he was promoted to manager and business partner and given the opportunity to invest in his own store. A few years later, he bought out his partner's shares and took over the business completely, and in 1913, he changed the name to JCPenney. By 1923, the chain was approaching 700 locations, mostly in the West, but they were making their way out east as well. 2 big factors that contributed to this early success. He would give the store managers the opportunity to open their own store and be partial owner of them, similar to the way he gained his ownership, and that helped increase the number of stores. But the thing that made them profitable was private labels. These are what you would call the JCPenney brands. It's still a big part of what they do today. Back then they were different names, but today it's the equivalent of Worthington, St. John's Bay, Arizona, the jeans, not the iced tea. In these cases, other companies make the clothes, then JCPenney puts their label on it. They're cheaper for the store to obtain and therefore cheaper for the customer. And if it's good stuff, that name gains credibility and the store can justify pushing up those prices, which leads to good margins. If done right, everybody wins. They became a public company in 1929, which if you're familiar with the history of the US economy and the stock market, that wasn't the best time. But they made it through it, and unlike most others, they grew over those years. It was the Great Depression, so customers were looking for clothes that were cheap but durable and high quality, which is what JCPenney famously offered. By the 1960s, they were offering just about everything. That's when they started their mail order catalog, which soon became the second biggest of its kind in the US. They also started offering hardware and auto services and gardening equipment and sporting goods. In many aspects, they were becoming Sears. It was in the early 1970s when they opened their 2000th store. They hit their all-time high soon after, which to put that into perspective, it's about twice as many as they've been operating over the past couple of decades. Another meaningful comparison, all of these locations combined with all of this extra stuff that they were offering led to some high sales. In 1981, not adjusted for inflation, they had higher sales than they did in 2018. But high sales doesn't necessarily mean they're doing well. Well, there's plenty of other numbers to consider. Plus, consider their competition. I suggested that they were essentially becoming Sears, and a 1970s, 1980s Sears is not a company you want to compete against, even if you are JCPenney. In 1982, they decided that they would become more of a traditional department store by specializing in clothes and the other stuff that we know them for today and phasing out most everything else. They slowly made these changes throughout the rest of the 80s, and as a result, they were a smaller but more focused and efficient company. That's how we got the store that we all know today. Now, for the decline. There's two parts to it. The first part is pretty simple: economic downturn. In 2008, there was a weak economy, so a department store that targeted the middle class ran into some trouble. It's all pretty basic. I don't have too much to say about it. It's all reflected in their figures. Sales fell, comparable store sales went into the negative, income went down, but still remained positive. I wouldn't say there's anything major here that would really threaten the safety of the business. I'll admit, they were seemingly hit harder than their competitors, maybe because of their size or target demographics, but if they play it smart, they should recover with the rest of the economy. Looking at this graph, it's the same as the one I showed before, but for the previous 6 years, they fell and started recovering right with everyone else. But then in 2012, when everything else continued to go up, JCPenney went crashing down. Just about any graph I can show tells the same story. Things went crashing down in 2012, and everything was far worse than they were during the recession. It's obvious that this 2012 downfall wasn't market related, it wasn't industry related, it didn't come from the outside. The CEO of JCPenney from 2004 to 2011 was Myron Ullman. He was the one in charge. During their peak year of 2006, he got them through the recession and did some good things for the company. Then in November of 2011, Ron Johnson took over. He used to be a big part of Apple and is thought to be the one most responsible for the design and success of the Apple stores. He looks up to Steve Jobs and takes heavy influence from him. So in late 2011, Johnson took over JCPenney and almost instantly started this massive transformation. There was a lot to it, but here's some of the highlights. The store layout. He changed it from what you typically see into what they call 100 separate boutiques with a town square in the middle. The products they offer. He strayed away from the private label, the JCPenney brands, in favor of the more popular, in many cases, higher-end brands. A new logo and spokesperson. They brought on Ellen DeGeneres to promote all of these new changes and dramatically changed the logo. They abbreviated their name to JCP and stuck it in the corner of a box. I guess it was more modern looking. Maybe the biggest part of their transformation was what they call fair and square pricing. They would set their prices, and that's that. No coupons or clearance racks or rushing to the store before noon to take advantage of their Labor Day sales bonanza or whatever they're called. Just fair and square pricing. If you're familiar with Apple, I think you can see the influence here. In many aspects, he was applying the Apple model to a department store, which is an idea, but it's an odd one. I can see that Ron Johnson was doing what he knew, but you just can't take something that works for cell phones and apply it to clothing. Like consistent pricing. No one goes bargain hunting for a $700 cell phone that they're going to be using for the next 2 years. If they bring that price down to $680, it really doesn't increase my chances of getting it. It's not that kind of thing. But you know what people do go bargain hunting for? Clothing. Hey, do you want to stop by JCPenney and see if there's any good deals? Is something that people stopped saying when they adopted this new pricing. In my perception anyway, do you know who loves bargain hunting? Moms. And that leads me to the real reason all of this failed. Historically, the JCPenney customer is a middle-income, middle-aged woman. Most of these changes were intended to broaden that demographic to attract younger and higher-income people. Bringing the popular brands have this trendy boutique layout and a hip new logo. Well, the young people really didn't fall for it, and instead, they just ended up repelling their older, existing customers. There were no more bargains. There was no urgency to visit. Some of the brands that they liked were gone. The layout was new. It was essentially a different store. It took them by surprise too, because they didn't even test any of this. I would think that before implementing any major changes to a brand that's had a loyal following for 100 years, I would test them. Bring in some regular customers or potential younger customers into a concept store, ask them questions, have them fill out surveys, make adjustments along the way, and ideally end up with something that everyone likes. But no, they felt the changes needed to be made fast, and there was no time for any of that. The result? A 25% decline in comparable store sales, and it almost killed the company. In 2013, they fired Ron Johnson and brought back Myron Ullman and basically asked him to reverse all of this nonsense and bring things back to how they were. That's exactly what happened. The damage was done, but he stopped the bleeding and hoped that the wound would heal over time. In 2015, Ullman left again, and they brought in this new guy, Marvin Ellison. He was an executive over at the Home Depot for the previous 12 years. This is when JCPenney started trying to sell appliances, but that didn't work out. In 2018, Ellison resigned to take over as CEO of Lowe's, which makes sense. And now there's a new CEO who can hopefully do something to fix this whole mess. Let me know in the comments, is there any hope for JCPenney? Personally, I don't see it, and that seems to be the popular opinion. I think they showed incredible disrespect toward their customers. They ran this whole campaign apologizing for everything, but I don't blame them for not coming back. James Cash Penney took this company to some crazy heights and did a lot of good things. Over 100 years of building a reputation, and they lost it so quick. And now they're still trying to recover from it, on top of dealing with all these online retailers. It is a definite uphill battle from this point. Also, what do you think of the store itself? Do you remember when this transformation was taking place, and how did it change your perception of them? Did anyone actually think it was an improvement? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.